So hello everyone. I hope you guys are all doing well and enjoying working from home. My name is Erfan. I am an Azure Solution Architect and I'm a consultant, and my focus is mostly on cloud development, especially Microsoft Azure. Today I want to talk about Azure API management. First, let's start with the basic. Why APIs? So before we had service-oriented architecture, most applications were based on monolithic design. As you can see on this picture, for example, for an e-commerce website, all different components of the application, they were in a big giant solution file. And all of these components, they were dependent on each other. So if you wanted to change one section or deploy one section individually, we had to deploy the whole application. So development and deployment process, they were less agile, basically. On the right-hand side, you can see service-oriented architecture or microservices. This is a very simple architecture. This is a simple diagram. As you can see, there is a client application that talks to a bunch of backend services. Let's say the client application is like an Angular application, and the backend application, they could be .NET, they could be Java, they could be any sort of application that accept REST calls. In the e-commerce example that we just been through, we have one application, let's say the React application, and it talks to the order service, talks to the catalog, product catalog service, and all of these services, they are being developed separately, individually. They can be deployed individually. They have their own databases. Okay, so let's talk about Azure API management. What is Azure API management? According to Microsoft, APIM helps organizations to publish existing backend API for external customers and internal developers. So APIM does a few things. It accepts API call and route them to the backend. You can have multiple backend services. You can have multiple versioning. Azure API handles that. It also handles security aspects of your application, like API key, JWT token. You can connect APIM with things like AWS Cognito, Azure B2C, Okta, other security components that they are out there. It also helps with enforcing usage quota and rate limits, basically throttling. We will have a demo on that. It helps with transforming your API on the fly without you make any code modification. You can, for example, change the header. You can replace a header, or you can change the data format, for example, from JSON to XML or from XML to JSON. It also helps with caching. It has built-in caching and external caching, like you can connect it to Redis, which is a great product. You can use APIM for logging metadata for analytics purposes. If you want to do auditing or performance checking, you can use that. And one of the most important things for developers is API documentation. The same way that Swagger helps developers, Azure APIM also helps for testing and other purposes. Okay, let's talk about different components that Azure APIM has. So in the good old ways, we have the client talks to the backend, and backend process the request and come back with the response to the client. APIM sits in middle of the process, so it sits between client and the backend, and has three main components. The first and most important one is the gateway, which is responsible for directing the calls, for caching, for logging, for verifying JWT token. We have the developer portal, which is for documentation, for testing API, and we have the Azure portal where you manage the whole service. So Azure APIM has 5 different tiers: consumption, developer base, and standard, and premium. consumption is you pay around $4 per million call, and the first 1 million call will be free. So it is great for testing. So if you want to do QA, dev, or your own testing, consumption is great. Developer and basic and the rest of them, they are good for like production environment, for testing environment. They start from, I believe, $40 all the way to $2,800. They have different features, which is, you guys need to check it before you start using them. Okay, let's start with the first demo. I don't know if you guys see my Firefox. Somebody please tell me.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So let's go to the portal. You click on portal.azure.com, and on the top you search for Azure API management. So there's a service comes as API management service. You click on it, you will see the list of the API management you had. You can click on add to add a new one, to create a new one. You need to assign it a name, and this is a unique name. If I put ABC, probably no, it's not taken. You can put ABC, you put your subscription, you put your resource group. Resource group is like a folder, logical folder. You put your location, this is very important. And the importance of this is you want your API management to be in the same region as your backend services are for performance purposes. You select your tier, you put developer or any of them, so we put developer, and you can assign application inside. We will go through this at the end of the conversation. I am not going to click on create. It's going to take us 15 minutes. I have already created one. We can go over this. So this is when your service is being provisioned. This is.
Can you increase the font? People are saying it's really small.
Is it better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So this is the first page for the API management. You get a gateway URL. This is a unique URL. You get another URL for your developer portal. In here, the API section is where all of your API are going to be. You can import API. You can create API. We're going to go over that. You can assign subscription to your API the same way that you say, my APIs are public. I just want to let a specific people with the subscription key call my API. You can define product for your API. I just created the conf API. This is like a category. This is like a logical container for your API. In here, we will go over some of these. In here, you get your developer portal. Let's say you are managing a team, and in your team, you want to give access to 5 different users. In here, you go and give them access. So just these people, they can connect to your API and developer portal and try your API. So you want to give them access to QA people and developer people most likely. In here, you get the analytics and monitoring of your API. We will go over some of these, and in here there are more advanced features if you want to secure your APIM inside a virtual machine, or you want to add Redis as external cache. Okay, let's go to the API. So there are different ways for creating the APIs. One of them is just creating one blank API. The other way, which is the most used one, is Open API. Open API is a standard, as it says, interface for the REST API. You can generate your own Open API JSON easily in your application. In .NET World, you need to install packages like Swashbuckle or NSWAG and generate your API. You can also use the old traditional way, WSDL, Logic App, and other ways. So I have one JSON already implemented. This is an open source. This is by Microsoft. If I put this guy in the Swagger, you will see idle. So the same JSON, you will see your API. This is the Swagger way of showing your API. We can try it. So let's say we go to speakers, for example. If I try it and execute, this is my API. This is the response of my API. I want to use the same JSON and import these API into my API manager. You just copy paste it. You can select a file and upload a JSON file. It automatically gets the display name and all of those things. I already have one, so I'm going to call this one version 4, for example. I need to have a suffix for my API. I call it this. I can call it API or anything. Click on create. It takes a couple of seconds for it to import your API. The same APIs that we saw in Swagger, we can see them here. We can go ahead and try them. You can click on each of them, then click on test, and then send a request. And you will get the response back. Same way. Okay. Let me go over my note. So some of the functionalities that we talked about for the APIM, you can manage your API or basically assign some policies to your API. There are 3 different places that we can assign a policy. There are inbound processing, backend, and outbound. I will explain to you guys what are the differences. But just giving you an example, I want to add a policy to my inbound processing. Let's say my API is public. I don't want anybody abuses this API. So I say in 20 seconds, if somebody calls this API more than 3 times, I want to block them. So I go to the policy. There are a bunch of already built-in policies for us. I want to use the rate limit by key. It asks you how many API call in the what period of time, in 20 seconds. I don't want anybody to call this API in 20 seconds more than 3 times. It's going to cost me some money. So I save it, and then go into test, and test the API. So the first one is 200, the second one is 200, third one is good as well. So the fourth one, in 20 seconds, we get the 429 error code, and it says, try it in the next 11 seconds. So if we wait 11 seconds, we can call this API again. So this is a great tool. You don't need to do any code change. You can just play around with APIM for this. Another great tool that I've seen with APIM, which is very useful, is the API mocking. So for myself, there have been many instances that the front-end team and back-end team, they were working together. Usually front-end team, they need to wait for the back-end team to finish developing their own API and hand it over to the front-end team until they can start doing their own development. APIM has a feature called mocking API. So we can create a mock API based on the structure, based on the request and response that QA, based on the request response that developers and in the backend, developers in the front end that they have agreed on. To do that, I am going to create a new API. I'm going to call it mock1, and the URL will be mock1, for example. I am just building an API without having any backend for it. And then I go and say the response of this API for the 200 HTTP code should have this representation. This representation is, let me say this. Sorry, let me create a new one. I think I lost that. So in here we say application JSON is going to be my representation, and this will be my JSON response. So you can put a very simple JSON value and then save it. So my Mach2 API is ready for testing. I think I need to assign it to a product. So APIs, so each of the API, they need to be assigned to a kind of a product before they can be tested. So let me show you on my previously built API, so probably something is wrong. Oh, I found it. I know what that is. Okay, so before we can try it, we need to assign a policy. And the policy should be the mark response. So API without the mark response will not work. So this time should work. Yeah, you get the response back. So in this way, you get the response back regardless of what the backend is. And in here, you can go ahead and do your own development based on the sample response. So this has been very helpful for me in my own development when I interact with the front-end people. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. I want to talk more about the policies in the API. So in a good old way, we have client and backend. We send a request, we receive a response back. APIM and API gateway sits in the middle of the request and response. And it can interject the request and response in 3 ways, in 3 different sections. The first one is inbound. Inbound is on the request that they are received as soon as they are received to the APIM. The next phase is the back-end policies. These are the requests that the same request before it gets to the back-end services. And response is the policy that we apply on the way back from back-end to the client. We also have on error that can happen at any time. Policies are like this. They are XML file that you can change them. We will go over that in the portal. Okay. So let me tell you some of the policies that they are being used a lot. One of them is checking header. So let's say you want to add or remove a header. It is very helpful for security reasons, for security purposes, or you are talking to a backend that needs a specific header in your request. You can inject them here. Another useful policy is IP filtering. You can whitelist or blacklist some IPs. So, for example, you don't want your API being called from a specific country. You can do them here. You can change the response. You can inject something in your response, or if your request doesn't pass validation, don't even pass it to the backend services and just send the default response back. So it will bring the load down on your backend services. And then another one is caching. You can do caching with Redis. We can use the internal built-in caching. And another one is JSON to XML. One of my clients, they had a very old application that only accepts XML. they didn't want to touch that application, so they put APIM in front of it and just changed the JSON to XML to avoid any change to that old legacy application. Okay, let's go back to the second demo. Let's add some policies. So this time we are not going to use the built-in policies. I am going to use another API. As you can see, on each API that you call, there are 3 different sections: inbound processing, backend, and outbound processing. These are the places that you can change your API, change your policies. When you click on that, you can see the code. This is the same XML code that we saw. Let's go and insert a policy. So you can type it, or you can go to one of these snippets that Microsoft provided to us. They have categorized them into different sections. I want to convert my request from JSON to XML. And actually, I want to do it in my outbound, so in the response back. I will put it here. In here, it says, should I always convert it to XML? I would say yes, always. And it says, should I look for the header that says accept XML? I would say no, because I want to do it all the time. I will save it. We will see your policy here. I go to the test and try this time. Let me try, probably this one doesn't have a response back. Let me try it on this guy. Did I add it to the wrong one? Let me again go back to my previously built in. There's something probably wrong with my. So as you can see, the response back is in the XML format instead of the JSON format. If you want to use these policies, it's best to get familiar with all the policies that Microsoft has. If you can go to this URL, API management policy, Microsoft has a lot of different built-in policy. Unfortunately, you cannot have your own custom one. You need to use one of these. For example, the one that we're just looking at, for each of them that you want to use, you need to make sure where is the usage for that. So the usage is very important, that you can only do it in inbound and outbound and on error. You cannot do it on the backend side, and it applies to all the scopes. This documentation is really good, so whenever I want to add a new policy, I check it. They constantly update these policies to make sure there is no error, or they provide all the different scenarios that we have. So apart from all of these tweaking that we saw, APIM is a great product for security and adding security to your application. There are different ways for achieving that. One of them is limit clients call to a specific bandwidth. You can limit the size of the request and also limit the number of calls. As we saw, we did that in the demo. You can limit the number of calls per subscription. You can whitelist or blacklist the caller IP addresses. Another feature that I really like and I use is hiding backend API URL from the caller. You don't want anybody to know where are the backend services. You just want to hide it. There are different ways for that. The best way is using virtual networks in your cloud environment, but you can also do added security by using APIM to make sure they are hidden from outside world. Another feature that APIM has is protecting your backend API from direct calls. So let's say in your backend API, you say a specific header should be present in your API call. And if that specific header doesn't exist, you don't accept the call, you just reject the call. You can add that to your APIM. So APIM can inject a specific header, like an encrypted header, to each call to make sure that the caller is legit. It is another nice feature that APIM can provide for you. The next slide, we'll talk about the strategy in designing APIM. It is very important to not overuse this thing because it will add one more layer to your application. So it has its own overload. It slows down the whole process. Not significantly, but a little bit. It is very important to be careful with logging and monitoring. I'm going to show you how that works. There are some, APIM has some limitation in terms of number of API call can happen. I hope Microsoft increased that. And we just be very careful with the offloading part of the gateway. Based on my own experience, it is not a good idea to put the authentication APIM. That would put the dependency on your APIM and your backend application will be wide open. So I would prefer to put the authentication inside my backend application. So there are more functionalities. So let's go and do another quick demo on the logging and monitoring. In the APIM world, you can set each API to log. So every request comes to the application, they can be logged. If you click on one of the API and go to the setting, at the end there is a diagnostics log. You can enable that and say these logs, where should they go and what is the sampling. If your calls are if you are receiving more than 1,000 calls per second, it is recommended to put this number to 20% because it is overload on your system, and you don't want to log every single request. That's expensive. You can play around with these. If I save it and go back to my home, go back to my application inside. This is something that I have already connected to my APIM. You can see all the requests and responses here. Application Insight is a great tool if you have a backend services, or even if you have a client application. You can see the number of errors. So in the last hour, let's look at what are the errors that we had. So the Mark II had error. We can see what happens at 404 because it didn't assign it to a proper product and proper policy. The speaker has a 429. This is when we call this API too many times. It gives you why that happens and what is the reason behind that. and you can limit the problem to just your code. This happens because of the rate limit by key, so there is no code involved. It tells you what happened and what is the error, so rate limit is exceeded. You can also check the performance of your application. Let's say you are receiving 10,000 requests per second. You can come here and see each of your API that they are underperforming. So the speaker is taking 213 milliseconds. It's probably too high. There is something wrong. You can tune it. You can put caching if needed. You can see what are the dependency. We don't have any database dependency. We only have backend. This tool will tell you everything. Another good feature that Application Insight has is gives you the application map. For us, this sample is very, very simple, but if you have database, if you have Cosmos DB, if you have third-party components, you will see all of them here. And that's about Application Insight. One thing else I want to show you guys is the developer portal. So Microsoft has recently introduced a new developer portal. It is buggy. We always had issues working with that. So I want to show you the legacy one. I'm sure they're going to fix all of these bugs and this will be ready for prime time. But in the meantime, you can use the legacy version. In the legacy version, you can go to your portal. You can, I am an administrator, but you can sign up as a developer and get approved and see all the API. So these are the 3 API sections that we have. So demo conference is the one that we're working on. You can see the list of the API, you can try them one by one and get the response back. This is the one that we played around with the XML, with the changing the header, and if I call this guy too many times, I should, probably this guy doesn't have a limit. You can also see how you can call your API with different languages. Yeah, with that, I open up the chat. If anybody has a question, I would be happy to answer them if I can.
Yeah, if anyone has anything, feel free to drop it in the chat there. In the meantime, I was going to seed it with one thing at least. So I was curious if you can go and show a little more detail around the auth and rate limiting side of this. Like how flexible is the layers that you get there?
In terms of authentication?
Yeah, and also like for things like rate limiting, are you able to rate limit based on the client that's calling or different endpoints, or like how flexible is that system?
It is not, unfortunately, very flexible. You need to follow the policies that they have. So let's say go to the late limit per call. So they constantly add new features to APIM. You can rate limit based on the key. So each person, let's say your API are being consumed by 5 different companies or 5 different applications. You can assign different keys per each of them, and you can rate limit based on that, or you can do based on subscription, or you can do quota. All of these are configurable, but based on only these parameters, not more than that. That's the limitation that APIM has, so you cannot become very creative with what they have.
Gotcha. So it's just a number for a given window.
Yeah, exactly.
Still useful to not have to write that yourself, though.
Yeah, it's very useful. Yeah. So the idea is just decoupling API-related logic from your backend service. You don't want to code these things. You just want to hand it over to APIM that does it best and offload all of those logic. That's the main logic behind APIM.
Makes sense. We have a question here from Adrian. It says, currently using Azure AD to secure our API, so we're able to see which user is hitting the API. Would APIM be able to use Azure AD and forward the user info onto the API?
It does. I haven't tried it myself, and the reason for that is I always wanted to have my authentication as part of my backend services, but it definitely does that. I think it is not possible in the developer tier that I have, but the answer is yes, it is possible.
Cool. And then another one from Cisco says, does it have caching? And if so, is it per endpoint?
Yes, so you can assign caching. So if you go to one of the APIs, so let's say get session, I think I have you need to assign a policy. So these are all the policies for caching. Store to cache, I believe that's the one, and you can store it for number of seconds. It gets more sophisticated. I know there are other tools. So if you go to you can do custom caching with that. You can connect it to your Redis. But again, you need to be careful. So you can do these things based on the different variable and different criteria. And it is best to cache the APIs that they have a static content. So let's say their content or their response doesn't change a lot. You can assign different variables. So based on different variables, you cache them. It is good for simple use cases. If your use case is complex, it's better to do it in the backend services.
And is there any notion of like API versioning?
Yes, you can definitely do versioning. That's a good question. The same way that I imported these APIs, I can import the same API and call it version 4. So I have, let's say this is a version 1, it's a version 4. And they can connect to different backends. I can duplicate the same, clone the same data structure, API structure, but point them to the different backends. And that way you can put the versioning. And also it gives you the adding a different revision. So these are different ways for you to just having versioning in your API.
Cool. And one more from Adrian, who's wondering if it's possible to use multiple authentication types at once.
I don't think so. I haven't seen anybody. It just connects to one tool. So I have seen APIM gets connected to B2C. So considering both of the tools are Microsoft based, so it's easy. I know someone had a struggle in connecting Azure APIM with AWS Cognito. It was not easy to do, but it is doable. So the other question is about MuleSoft and Delboomi. So there's a big difference between Azure APIM and MuleSoft. So MuleSoft is more sophisticated, and it is a great tool for integration. With MuleSoft, you can connect to the SQL database. You can do coding. You can write, I believe it's a Java. You can write Java inside MuleSoft. But APIM is a simple product. It is good for single-page application. It's good for website. It's good for service-to-service communication. Doesn't have the complexity that MuleSoft or Delboomi has. Those guys are more sophisticated, and you need to spend more time to set it up. This thing is very easy to set up, and you get very basic and useful functionality out of the box.
Cool. Lots of good questions so far. Anyone have anything else that they're holding out on?
Before we go, I want to show you guys the new developer portal. It's a very cool feature that they added. You can customize. So Microsoft always come up with these features. You can customize. This is your company. This is your company API. So you can open it up to outside world, or you can open it up to your own developers. You can put your own logo. You can just customize it. If I go to the, you can change the background, all of this fancy stuff. I think there is a way for seeing the, you can change the font. The same way that we saw that in the legacy portal, which doesn't look great, you can see the list of your API, you can test them and just brand them based on what you want. Even you can change them to different, test it in different resolution to make sure this works fine. So this is a very over-architected product in my mind, but it's a great thing. So hopefully when this product gets more mature, it can replace tools like Swagger in a more secure way, if you guys are interested. Yeah, I would recommend you guys, if you work with any backend services, give it a try. It is free. You get 1 million call for free, which is good for testing. So it takes a lot to call 1 million call.
Awesome. Last call for questions before we wrap it up. All right, I think we can probably call it there. Just wanted to say, thanks Erfan for going through this. This was really awesome. From our side, it was exciting to be able to actually host a meeting again. Obviously, it's been a frustrating gap, and we apologize for the mishaps at the top of the meeting. Learning curve and growing pains and whatnot, but definitely glad that we were able to get through all that, and that a whole bunch of folks were here and engaged and answering questions or asking questions and paying attention to everything. So we're gonna look to get some more stuff up on the calendar before too long. But in the meantime, thanks again for everyone for coming, and hope everyone is staying safe and healthy, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you guys. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks. Have a great night, folks.